Hi, everybody. How you doing today? My name is John Posada, and today we're going to talk about the MLOps platform here at Domino. I'm also a sales engineer here. Most of my experience in the past has come from working with MLOps as well as self-service analytics platforms. So it's a pleasure to be here today to demo to you Domino. So what I'd like to do for today is to really focus on just a quick presentation to give you some insight about Domino so you have some context. Then we're going to then look at how MLOps is performed in Domino and look at a life cycle, just an example for an outline, and then show you how with just a basic or simple project in Domino or even a complex one, how we can handle the entire MLOps lifecycle in the platform itself. So today we're going to talk about Domino, and Domino is a platform that powers data science for some of the world's largest and most advanced companies, including over 20% of the Fortune 100. Some of the world's largest banks, some of the biggest health insurers, rating agencies, and pharmaceutical companies all centralize their data science operations on the Domino platform. As you can see here, these are all the logos that we currently have as clients. And so you just have a good idea of, for the most part, who's really using Domino for MLOps and really unleashing as best as possible their data science practices. So what are we going to focus on first? So first thing I want to focus on is why companies struggle to scale data science. So we tend to talk to a lot of companies that want to become model driven, but the fact is it's very hard to get there. And most companies start off their data science efforts just with just like small experiments. And then they try to hire a few data scientists and task them with an exciting problem. Eventually they figure out that, they can get a model into production and delivers the benefits that they want and the approach that they're hoping for. But the trouble comes when companies try to scale data science. And so usually that means more projects, the team needs to get bigger, they have different processes. It's almost every instance that we hear as examples when we're talking to clients for like the common challenges when it comes to scaling data science. So the first thing that comes into mind is infrastructure friction. So data science today is increasingly complex and it requires access to powerful compute resources, and high value and sensitive data is usually an issue. And so you have to be very careful of that. And so with the latest open source tools and packages, when data science teams can't get access to the infrastructure they need, they create ad hoc work and workarounds that involve building and maintaining their local infrastructure. It's usually called shadow IT. So the multiple stacks of data science tools and the bespoke hardware for each team slows this data scientist down. And that tends to frustrate IT because it creates significant support costs. It increases operational and security risks that ultimately slows innovation. That then leads into what we call limited collaboration. So this is the second challenge, and it really centers around silos, which basically limits collaboration and knowledge sharing at an organization. Because data scientists often work independently with a variety of different tools, there are no standard ways of working, which compromises the company's like auditability, reproducibility purposes with respect to data science. And the lack of visibility into, like, for example, in-flight projects also causes concerns about governance and security, as well as the loss of institutional knowledge when data scientists tend to move on to different companies. So teams aren't able to find or use previous work. They can't effectively collaborate with one another. Everybody winds up doing lots of repeat work, and all of this which is what wastes time and effort for organization. Now, the last struggle for data science is really production challenges and being able to operationalize your models once you've built them. During the development phase, data scientists find tracking and managing experiments a manual and time-consuming process across different types of tools and packages. And later, when it's time for the model to be put into production, teams tend to wind up reinventing processes and adding more complexity. And that tends to delay business value and increases risk. And when they finally get a model into production, it's inconsistent or non-existent, and they don't have the proper monitoring practices in place to reduce, create additional risks from basic critical business decisions on models that were trained using data that may not really reflect the current business conditions specifically. So that leads us to the next item, and that is really talking about enterprise MLOps and how it can accelerate data scientist scale. So Domino is a pioneer in a new set of processes and technologies that enables companies to really overcome the challenges of data science at scale. And enterprise MLOps allows companies to really progress through the end-to-end data science lifecycle to manage, develop, deploy, and monitor business critical models faster. And they're able to do this at enterprise scale. And with this requisite, they're able to cover security, governance, compliance, reducibility, and auditability that are required to do this safely and really universally at the organization. So with that being said, what are some of the powerful benefits of enterprise MLOps? Well, for data scientists, they can spend less time on overcoming DevOps challenges. They have self-service access to their preferred tools and infrastructure so they can develop and deploy models faster to drive more immediate business impact. For data science leaders, this gives their team an easy way to find, reproduce, and reuse past work. So there's less reinventing of the wheel. Knowledge can be compounded. They have breakthroughs that are happening much faster, and teams are more productive overall. It also allows standard ways of working to be put in place to enforce data science best practices, including managing projects in flight. And lastly, for IT, instead of having data scientists download all the kinds of tools and packages onto a laptop and other bespoke hardware, everything is centralized to reduce support tools. And so IT is able to really allocate infrastructure and other tools to people and projects based on the business benefit and ROI they're expected to generate, and then monitor and attribute company spend accordingly. So what I want to talk about next is how really, MLOps affects an organization. While many vendors talk about MLOps, we're the ones who are really delivering on its potential. In fact, many of our customers describe Domino as a force multiplier that makes your data science teams more productive because it helps them overcome the challenges of scale that we discussed earlier. Now, there are some 4 key differentiators that I'm going to show you right now, in which we are consistently hearing from customers that set Domino apart from our competitors, really. So the first one is open and flexible. So Domino supports the broadest ecosystem of open source and commercial tools and infrastructure. Data scientists have basically self-service access to their preferred IDEs, languages, and packages, so they can focus on data science and not really just on the infrastructure, but they could focus on that as well if necessary. It also allows IT to consolidate different tools onto a single platform. So you're able to reduce costs and support burden, as well as provide governance across a wide variety of tools, packages, compute, and whatnot, because it's basically a system of record. Now, what that leads us to then is really the next differentiator, and that is built for teams. So well, we're going to focus on this a little bit because teams, when you're enabling data scientists to collaborate more effectively, the fact is that the cloud machine learning services, the drag and drop providers, and practically every other data science solution out there can help an individual data scientist build a decent model. We know that. But for individuals and small groups, let's say maybe 2-3 data scientists, these tools might suffice, but they're not designed with teams in mind. And so that's why we should focus on teams. In contrast, when you're using Domino, you can automatically track all data science artifacts, including code, packages, versions, parameters, and more, with the purpose to enable full visibility and repeatability and reproducibility basically at any time across the end-to-end lifecycle of every use case, because you have that model lineage. So teams are using different tools that can find previous work and seamlessly collaborate on a project, with the ability to also leverage valuable insights and harvest a flow of collective wisdom between each other. So that leads also into another differentiator, which is the integrated workflows. So we are able as a company to help companies maximize model velocity to get more models into production faster. So Domino supports the full end-to-end lifecycle from creation to production, and we're able to explore data, train models, validate, deploy, monitor, repeat, all in a single platform. And Domino is able to basically enable companies to professionalize their data science through common patterns and practices with workflows that reduce friction and accelerate the lifecycle within each step across key transitions in the enterprise MLOps lifecycle. So basically, all the people involved in data science can maximize their productivity and their impact of their work. And finally, we're able to do this really at enterprise scale. So while you do have disparate data science teams that are free to use their preferred tools, packages, and infrastructure, all aspects of their work are centralized and orchestrated through Domino, a system of record. So users can basically onboard quickly, find previous work easily, collaborate effectively, and reproduce experiments basically seamlessly. And Domino is able to provide the security, the governance, the compliance, and all the elements that are required to scale data science safely and universally across an organization. With that being said, this basically leads us to our last slide before we go into our demo. And that's really to talk about the components that you're about to see with respect to Domino. So there are really 5 main components of the Domino platform that will allow you as a user or users to interact seamlessly to support the full data science lifecycle. The first one is being the workbench. It's basically a notebook-based environment where data scientists go to do their research and development and experimentation. It's a durable workspace that gives data scientists self-service access to all the tools and infrastructure they need to run, track, and compare experiments. So we're talking about specific IDEs, we're talking about specific environments with packages and libraries that you need, as well as the infrastructure you're going to need to go ahead and run your experiments inside of a workbench. Then from there, we're going to go into Launchpad. So Launchpad is where we deliver on the last mile. We're looking at getting models into production so they can create business value and impact. Many times this takes the form of an API endpoint, that can be embedded into an existing system or as an application so business users can really interact with the underlying model that they're working with. From there, the third component is really model monitoring. So with model monitoring, you're able to provide the ability to we're able to provide the ability to go ahead and monitor all the models that you've built in production across the company and automatically detect when they need to be updated or replaced based on thresholds that you set in place, and even go ahead and re-trigger the training of some of the models that you've built in Domino. From there, we can also consider the Knowledge Center, which is all about tracking and managing work in a central repository of key learnings, basically a system of record. This is where users go to find, reuse, reproduce, and discuss work in a highly collaborative environment. And so basically data scientists can set their goals for their teams and manage the individual work products that they're delivering to make overseeing the end-to-end data lifecycle or the data science process basically a lot more efficient for them. And lastly, what this does is this all really sits on top of a scalable and robust enterprise infrastructure foundation that's really based on Kubernetes. So whether you run Kubernetes in the cloud or on-prem or even hybrid, it's really the core technology that allows data scientists to orchestrate infrastructure, including CPUs, GPUs, RAM, and distributed compute across different platforms as well as across different clouds. And you're going to be able to manage the packages and environments that support model development and reproducibility really at any point in the future. So with that being said, I'll show you a lot of information. We tried to nail that down under 15 minutes, which we did, which is great. Next, we're going to be able to go ahead into the demo. But before we do that, what I want to show you is what we at Domino identify as the MLOps lifecycle in reference to the actual Domino platform itself. So you see here, we have 4 different layers throughout that entire MLOps lifecycle. And so at Domino, we start off with the first layer, which is really where you prepare your project data. So what I mean by this is, in this first layer, you're going to create a project. And this project, you're going to basically set up with all the data sources you need, all the collaborators you want to work with, and then all the goals and tasks that you're going to set up for this project, which can be basically a pipeline or a chain of all the different types of models you need to build for a specific project set. From there, we're going to go into the second layer, which is really where you're going to develop the model. So you're going to prepare and evaluate your models. So what that means is, in Domino's context, we're going to customize the compute environment you're going to need. For instance, whether you're going to go ahead and use Spark, Ray, Dask, or MPI, something along those lines, as well as leverage your preferred IDEs as a user or a set of users as data science practitioners, where that means you want to use VS Code, PyCharm, Spider, RStudio. It's up to you, really. And so we're going to be able to work with distributed compute frameworks as well, as I mentioned beforehand. And also compute environment, something I miss is that you're able to select, for example, if you want to work with an image, since we're working on Kubernetes, which is a representation of an environment, the packages and libraries, whether you're talking about using a programming language, for example, like Python, R, Julia, or you want to work for a specific framework like TensorFlow, TensorBoard, something along those lines. Those are all supported because, again, they're just environments that you're going to attach to a containerized workspace or job. And I'll show you what I mean by that momentarily when we go into demo. And then you're also able to run and track experiments. That being said, that means that basically if you want to create a batch job and you want to run that, whether it's programmatic or in the platform manually or based on a certain time frame, you have all those capabilities to do that in Domino, especially with respect to the second layer of developing your model. From there, we'll then be going into deploying a model. And so in deploying a model, again, you can also run jobs if necessary, even jobs in parallel if you need to. You can create model API endpoints. Basically, what that means is you have a model, you've built it, you have all the artifacts that's necessary, then you can go ahead and create an endpoint as a catch file and then go ahead and start serving it, or provide the artifacts for that model that you've used to like an edge device to go ahead and run that for you, or even use a Docker image that represents that model API endpoint in a separate platform that handles containerization. We can also look at, for example, web applications and how you can communicate with them inside of Domino, as well as external. If you're not a Domino user, for example, but you want to provide that to someone to use, then you can see how sharing and collaboration can happen in that layer. And then lastly, really is the monitoring aspect of it, where we're going to look at how we can analyze, production models, whether that's data drift, when we're looking at training and prediction data sets for data drift. And then for model quality, we're looking at, for example, the predictions themselves with respect to the actuals, which is what's called the ground truth in the industry as well. And just be able to analyze that. So with that being said, now that you have an idea of all these 4 layers, we're going to go into the demo. And what I'll do is I'll try my best to come back and reference some of these layers in the MLOps lifecycle so you know where we're at with respect to MLOps lifecycle in Domino itself. Perfect. Well, from that, we will now go into the actual demo environment itself. So when you log into Domino for the first time, as you see here, I'm showing you what we call projects. Remember when I showed you just recently in that previous slide, the first layer is where we're going to prepare our project and our data. It's here where when you're in projects, you'll see already what you own as an owner for Domino with respect to your projects, as well as if you're collaborating on any projects, you'll see them here if you've been added as a collaborator. When you're in a project for the first time, before we go into that actually, you'll see here, I have showing 4 projects. I'm showing tags. Tags are a way to search for projects. In Domino, if you see on the left side, we have a search index. So you can actually go ahead and search for projects that may exist or data sets or artifacts or model APIs. We have a search index that we use here and we provide to you. So that way, say, for example, your entire organizations are working in Domino and you want to work on a specific project or create it, there's a chance that maybe someone else already has in the organization. So if I type, for example, like wine quality here, you'll see here I can see basically projects that exist with that name convention and it'll be highlighted for me. This is just to show you how quick it is to go ahead and search for existing items that may exist already if they're made publicly available in the platform itself. If not, you won't be able to find it unless you're an admin. So what we're going to do is we're going to first go into a project. So in this case, I'm going to go into a project called wine quality. In this project specifically for this model, what's happening is we're trying to predict, what's the best type of wine, whether it's a red wine, whether it's a white wine, and then based on its acidity, and its percentage of alcohol, we can determine, what ranking we want to give this wine from a scale of, say, for example, 1 to 10, something along those lines, or 1 to 5. But in this scenario, what I'm showing you is when I log into a project, see where it says overview, I'll be able to see automatically a manage section where I have goals. Remember when we talked about the MLOps lifecycle? A project was set up. I have some goals I want to go ahead and define. Goals are just tasks. So it's basically you're in the platform itself, you're logged in, you have a project, you want to assign some tasks, you're working with collaborators. You can create tasks for those collaborators, whether it's like, for example, exploring data, reviewing data sets. All you have to do is click the button here below. It says add new goal. You can add a goal, provide a description, and even attach it to files that you're going to create or you already have created in the file system and confirm that those files are completed as part of the task. This is done in the platform using Jira. So we use Jira as our project management tool. So we can go ahead and manage our tasks. So if you go into Jira in your own organization and you have it connected to Domino, you'll see all the tasks that are assigned to individual projects by collaborators that are working on that project. You'll see here, if you have a goal set up, you can actually go ahead and say, hey, you want to mark this goal as complete or incomplete. If there's something you need to go ahead and make a change to current existing goals. When you're in a project, you'll see here, there's an option that says settings in the left blue nav. If I select that option here, that's going to give us the capabilities to go ahead and handle, for example, the type of hardware tiers you want to make available to users or add collaborators and give them certain permissions. Inside the hardware environment, you'll see here that I can select my hardware tier. Hardware tier, I'm going to show you in a moment when we go to a workspace. It's basically a way to define what you want to assign to a project, either by default in the project section, so that when you have collaborators working together and they want to build a workspace environment, which is inactive or run jobs, they'll use this default hardware tier unless they choose to change it themselves when they're building those environments. And I'll show you what I mean when I say that. Where it says access and sharing, I can actually go ahead and add users in here if I need to go ahead and work with me. So if I start typing users that exist in the platform, or instead users that are collaborators with me, I can go ahead and just click on their name. Well, correction, in this case, they're not collaborators. They will be after I select these options, but we'll show you all the users in the platform itself. I can go ahead, click on the name, click invite, and now there'll be a collaborator working in this project. And in this case, you'll see here, it'll show up where now they're a user in the actual project itself, and they have a role that I can specifically assign them depending on the type of role I want to give them that we offer here at Domino as part of the platform. We also work with ADAP and SSO, so those are all options you can work with. So now that I've taken care of the fact that I've got a project created, I've assigned some tasks like I showed in the overview. I have added some collaborators. Now I'm going to go to the section that says materials and files. So in this section here, this is what we call the file system. So in Domino, when you actually are building a project, you have to assign it a file system. I didn't show you that before, so I'm going to show you that real quickly, what I mean by when I say a file system. So if I go back to my left blue nav and I switch back to my lab option, it's going to show me the projects. I showed you what happens if I click into a project, but if I want to create one from scratch, on the right side here where it says new project, if I actually click on that button, this is going to give me the option to go ahead and create a project from scratch as a new user. So I'm going to say in this case, project, and then I'm going to just call it test. And you'll see here, I can keep it private for just myself, discoverable by certain Domino users, or maybe just everybody. I'm going to keep it private. And when I click next, see here where Domino says code and it says Domino file system. This is how I would set the file system for a project that I'm about to create. And so what happens is Domino gives you two options. The first one is the actual file system itself, which is just a representation of a Git repo using version control that's going to be attached to your project from the Domino's platform locally. Or you can use instead an external Git service provider. So if I select this option, for example, I have choices. I can select Bitbucket, GitHub, GitLab, or an external Git repo service as long as I have the proper credentials to connect to it. And what's going to happen is if I select any of these options and then I click create, I'm going to go back to our project and I'm going to show you what you'll see here then is basically a file system that now I will have the accessibility to go ahead and add files, change files to them, and then whatever changes I make in that project, that would automatically be pushed back to the actual project itself that you're working with, correction, with the Git repo that you have set up for the project itself that you're working with. So you'll see here in this case, I have multiple files already created. In my situation, I'm actually using the local Git repo of Domino. You can see here that if I would have originally created a local file system for Domino, see on the top right where it says Git repositories, you have the option to actually go ahead and attach third-party Git repos as well. Say, for example, some of these repos have specific data sets that you want to work with, or files or code, or maybe modules that you have at your organization that you've created, whether it's Python or R or something along those lines. You can add those as third-party repos to go ahead and just call out to use inside of your project when you're creating a workspace or a job. And I'll show what that is momentarily as well. So we go back to files. You'll see here that if I select any of these files, so let's say, for example, I select EDA and I actually click on it itself, you'll see that I'm going to be able to see the exact script or file that I'm looking at. And you see where it says commit, I'll see when was the last time this file was committed. If I move to the right here where we show the arrow, I can actually see, in this case, in this example, how many times has this file been changed and by who and when. In this case, I'm just showing you a EDA Python notebook that I've created in Jupyter that I'm running some EDA on the model that I'm building right now for wine quality. If I want to, I can make comparisons as well between the same file and a different version that was committed if necessary to see, for example, what changes are made. If you're working with collaborators, all collaborators will be able to see these changes inside the project itself, and you can always revert back to a previous, for example, version controlled file if you see like there's some mistakes that should have never been done specifically by certain collaborators if possible. Now, if we go back, so I'm going to go back and click on the files. You'll see here on the top, this is the representation for the most part of the most latest file has been updated in the actual file system itself. So that way you can also see file changes at the actual repo level. Now, what I want to go into next is data. And I'm going to go into data next because the story I want to tell you is basically going to go into how we can create an interactive environment and run batch jobs, but you need to know all the necessary requirements before that happens. So if I click on data, in Domino, we handle data in 4 ways. So the first way that we handle data is what we call data sources. So data sources are just native data sources that Domino has built for you to go ahead and then just basically provide your credentials to these native data sources that we have available to communicate within your workspace or job environment, as you see here. And I show an example. When we open up a workspace that we created, how I can access this data source natively. This is something that really helps admins, especially in the organization, because they don't have to go ahead and prescribe building an ODBC or JDBC connector for you, although you do have that option as well. And that is one of the 4 options for data sources too. So once you've actually selected data source, you provide your credentials, you made it available to everyone or a certain subset or specific individual, then you'll see that data source will be here. And now that means that data source will be available when we create a workspace or a job later on throughout the process of this project for wine quality. But then click on Domino datasets. That's the second way of handling data in Domino. Domino datasets are really just persistent volumes that are attached to your project that can be consumed in a workspace or job. And the key aspect of using a Domino dataset is that with a Domino dataset itself, you can actually upload large datasets, massive, like say 80, 90, 100 gigabytes, and use it within Domino. Or if instead, when you're building, specifically speaking, your ETL processes or your retraining data or something along those lines, you can keep those data sets and have them persist inside the volume of the project itself. And that way, it just makes it easier for you to go ahead and build and continue throughout the life cycle of the model that you're building. Then you'll see here, if I select any of these actual directories, you'll see that what I'm looking at now is just basically, okay, there's some data sets that exist in here. Well, within Domino, if I select one of these options, I can take snapshots. So what I mean by snapshots is it's not I wouldn't say it's a specific DVC feature, but it's like a low-level DVC feature in the sense that you are able to take snapshot previews of your data sets as you're building them throughout the entire MLOps lifecycle, especially if there are certain changes that you're making or you want to keep record of those changes. And again, you can keep, those will be saved automatically in the Domino datasets platform. Now, at the end of the day, the data sources that connect to a Domino dataset is just data sources that you've connected on the back end of Domino. So that's something that you still keep. We don't touch anything. It's basically connected to your data source that you set up when you set up Domino the first time. So I'm going to go back. And then we have two more. We have external volumes. External volumes is just like, for example, EBS or NFS, network file systems. For the most part, you can connect those and have those enabled to work with inside of your Domino platform as well. So if you like to keep data inside your organization, you keep them in specific file systems, you can set those up, especially if they're local to you guys as well. So those are three of the different ways of having data sources, as I mentioned in Domino. The fourth and last one is more along the lines of really when you're working with an ODBC connector or JABC connector, something along those lines. You can have that set up in your code when you're just running your code specifically in a workspace or job. I don't have an exact example of that, but I think you'll get more understanding when I show you a workspace or job, what I mean by when I say you can just connect to ODBC or JABC connector. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to go into workspaces. So you see on the left blue nav where it says run, and this is workspaces and jobs. If I select workspaces, what's going to happen is we're going to take you specifically to the location of where you as a user have either already created workspaces for use in this project or you're about to. So let's learn some new terminology here, I would say specifically when it comes to what we call workspaces. So workspaces is just really an interactive environment that's a representation, for example, when you're writing code on your laptop. The difference is it's containerized, it's available inside of Domino, and you're always able to replicate that because you're going to attach what's called an environment. Environment is just a Docker image. So if I go any further, let me show you what I mean by that. You'll see in this case here, we have three different workspaces. The first one is already, started up and it's open. So I can just click on the open button and then Domino is going to take me directly to that. And you'll see right here. But before I get to that, you'll see here I have two more that are shut down. Since these are containerized environments, you can allocate resources to restart the containerized environment or deallocate them depending on your needs. So you always have resources available as long as it's been made available by your admin inside of Domino. You see here on the right side where it says create new workspace. If I select this option here, this is what I was just talking about a few minutes ago. So in this scenario, I'm going to just create a workspace. I'm going to say John workspace. And you see where it says workspace environment. A workspace environment is just the representation of a Docker image. Since we run on Kubernetes and Docker is our containerized engine, what's going to happen here is you can build actual environments or Docker images with all the packages and libraries that you need at your organization's level. So in this case, for example, you can have images that are based on Python, they're based on R. You might need to have requirements for specific versions of packages and libraries. That's all going to be done at the environment level, which can just be attached to an actual workspace. What do I mean by that? Before I go any further, see here in the left blue nav where it says environments. If I select this option, an environment, you see here, we're showing you all the environments that exist currently for your organization. I'm an admin, so I can see them all, whether they're private or global. But if I select, for example, Domino Workshop environment, here's an example. You'll see here that when an environment is built either by you or an admin in your organization, depending on the permissions you have, you'll see here that we can provide the URI. So basically, the registry that we want to go ahead and access for the image that we need. That can be a public registry, that can be a private registry. It's really up to your organization as to how they want to handle that. But for the most part, I can go ahead and access images and then build on top of them with Docker file instructions, because again, an environment is just a Docker image. So basically I can add, for example, specific packages, specific libraries, ODBC, JABC connectors, which is how you would handle the fourth way of accessing data in Domino is through that process where it'll just be programmatic. But you can see here, I can edit instruction files if I just click on edit definition. At the same time, you see where it says pluggable workspace tools? What that represents is really the IDEs that you want to work with inside of Domino. Because when it comes to IDEs in Domino, as long as it's web-based, it has a server that it can run on and it has a port and you can create that in a containerized environment, which for the most part, that's mostly all IDEs that are web-based for programming. You can go ahead and activate that in a containerized environment. And you see here in this case, I have 4 of them that I have available that I can add again. Any modes to it. I can add SAS, PyCharm, I can add Spider. Basically, the limitations are really up to what you're able to work with in your organization to have capabilities to work with. Then you'll see here we have setup scripts. We also have post scripts. And so setup scripts it's just basically a way for you to initiate the environment further if you need to. Either that's before you actually have the environment start up or after it's started up and you need to add certain types of like permissions or processes in place. The reason I'm showing you this is because this is going to tie back into when I'm in a project. You know, if I click back on the project that I'm looking at specifically and I go back to my workspace and I want to go ahead and create a new workspace, now you know what workspace environment is. And so because now you know what that is, now you know what you have accessible to that environment when you're going to attach it when you start running this workspace for the first time. And you see here that these IDEs, these four that I just showed you, are representation of the workspace plugins, which is basically attached to the environment that you've selected. And you see here I have between 4 different choices. In this case, I'm going to choose Jupyter Lab. You'll also see here where it says hardware tier. As I mentioned beforehand, a hardware tier is basically a resource that will be made available to you by your admin inside of Domino. So if you got to work with a specific set of projects and, you know, for example, that, you know, it might be heavy on the computation side, depending how heavy that is, you can either scale vertically or horizontally. If you want to scale, for example, in this case, vertically, then you have the selection between different hardware tiers you want to go ahead and select to be able to handle that for you, whether it's GPU based, CPU, or RAM. We work very well with NVIDIA's GPUs. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can go ahead and attach that. You can even attach NVIDIA's A100's cluster if necessary to go ahead and run your projects inside of Domino and then use those hardware tiers from those cluster environments. You also see here we have 2 other options. So if I click next, so I've selected my hardware tier. I'm going to click next. You see where it says data. Data just lets you go ahead and either attach a external volume or a Domino data set. Don't worry about data sources. I'm going to show you how that looks like momentarily when this is spun up. You see where it says compute cluster. If I click next, compute cluster is going to basically allow me to go ahead and select between 4 different environments to have. In this case, right now I only have set up Spark. So if I click on Spark, for example, you'll see here that I can actually go ahead and spin up the minimum number of executors. And I can see here that I can even attach a hardware tier to a executor, whether that's just for the executor or for the master itself. And then I can actually attach a Docker image for that cluster environment for Spark, where I can have all the specific libraries and packages that Spark needs specifically. I can put a max, or I can even enable auto scaling if necessary, just depending on the requirements of my actual workspace. And then when all said and done, if you just go ahead and click launch, we're going to then take you to an environment as the one you see now. Basically, as I mentioned before, this is your containerized environment. And so in here, I have the representation of the actual workspace environment, basically the Docker image with all the packages and libraries I need. And then you see here, I'm showing you all the files that exist. If I go back to Mount, all these files that you see here is basically copied over from the file system of your project. And so as a collaborator inside of Domino, when I create a workspace environment, that workspace environment is owned by me and me alone, because that's my environment to work with. Since I'm modifying the files, I'll be able to go ahead and, you know, if I select, for example, on top left blue nav here where it says file changes, when I make changes to the files, any changes I made can be synced back to the original file system of the project. If someone else in my organization who's working in the same exact project as I am, as a collaborator, for example, they have their own workspace environment set up, you can both be using the same exact file system, but you, for example, you can update by using different types of branches, for instance, or you can use the same branch and you rebase after each other, depending on how well and how comfortable you feel version control. But for the most part, you'll see you have those capabilities here. So in this example, you'll see here, if I've pulled, for example, I say pull all latest, it's being pulled. If there's anything to be pulled, then it's going to give me the okay. If there's any errors, it'll tell me what the error is, and I can go back and troubleshoot that afterwards. But once I'm done, so you see here, there's an error. So now you're aware what that is. You can go ahead and see in the logs. It turns out that someone else was working with code, or I was working with code in this case, and I forgot to push before I pulled. So I'm going to go ahead and say, save both versions. So you can see that even when you have constraints between, working with version control, we'll always keep track of everything you've done so you can go back and fix it if necessary in the future. And you'll see here now in this case, I have a file that's opened up, it's Jupyter Notebook. I'm doing some EDA for the wine quality. So I'm looking at all my features because I want to run some analysis on it. So you can see I have a few sets of features. I want to run real quick a heat map with respect to the correlation of each of those individual features, and then continue to run some more analysis. For example, run some Pearson correlation, determine which features are the most important for me for my wine quality project, look at a quick histogram of some of these features themselves and its distribution. And then when I'm ready,
I'm going to go ahead and just write this out as a file so I can use this later on throughout the process of my project while I'm building my predictive models. You'll see here as well that I can write code besides just Python. I can write code in R as well, especially in the same environment, because again, that environment is a representation of whatever you've done with respect to the Docker image that you want to use for your environment. So you can have a runtime engine for Python or Julia. We have individuals that use runtime engines for Scala. They have Domino where they work in it. The workspace is a SQL editor. Really, the creativity is up to you as to how you want to apply that inside of Domino itself. And then when you're done, you've made all your changes, you've saved, you've synced it back to the actual file system of the project itself. You can just go ahead and click stop and then release the resources that you're using. Before I mentioned, when we're working with an NFS or working with Domino dataset, when you have a native data sources and Domino set up in a project, you see here it says data sources 1 and 2, Oracle, for example, or Domino Wine Quality. If you select these options, you're actually able to go ahead and copy and paste the code snippet that Domino gives you to communicate with that data source that's native, and then just paste that into your code and start working with that as you need, specifically in the workspace environment itself programmatically. So you can just see all the capabilities of how we tie those in together in different ways in Domino. So now that I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and spin this off. So I'm going to just go ahead and click stop my workspace. Domino will now shut this down for me. And then that resource will be now released and be available for someone else. So next what I want to show you is jobs. So if we click on jobs in the left blue nav as well, jobs are very similar to workspace environments. The difference is a job is something that you're going to use when you want to run something programmatically or as a script or as a command. So you see here when I click on jobs, and I click on that, that button that says run. If I select this option, we can see here that Domino's going to ask you to provide either a file name or a command. So in this case, if I want to run a file name, say for example, I want to run daily scoring.py, the first thing Domino's going to do is if you're going to run a file name, Domino's going to look at all the files that exist and try to match that with what you're typing, specifically with respect to the project itself. So you look at the files that exist in the project because it's local to the project itself. So in this case, I just run daily scoring. I can see here, I can select this option if I want to, and the same capacity as when I'm working with specifically a workspace environment, I can select my hardware tiers, the Docker environment I want to attach, data, and then my compute cluster. And when I'm ready, I just go ahead and click start. And then what you're going to see is Domino's going to show you your actual project running below. And you'll see here that I have a multitude of jobs that I've worked with, and they all have a number. So say, for example, I click on the latest run daily scoring, okay? I'm looking at that job that just ran. I can see the number. I can see the title that was given basically for this job. The command that I went to go ahead and select, in this case, it was a file name versus an actual command itself. When did it start? Who's the user that's running this? In this case, it's me. What type of resources did I use if it went over a certain threshold? How much time it took this job to run? What was the status? Was it good? Was it bad? Is it still running? Did it fail? If you want to go ahead and communicate with other individuals, if you select this option here for collaboration purposes, you can run comments. So I can say, hey, Jim. If I type @ and then Jim's name, he'll show up as an option. I can ask him, please review results. And so this is how I can work with him collaboratively. Please check results. And now when I do that, Jim's going to get an email from Domino specifically to go ahead and check results. And so once he gets that email, he can go ahead and come back in along with Domino, go into projects, go to jobs, and then see what's going on here with this job and look at the results. You'll see here, I'm showing you 2 columns for metrics, MSE and R2. In Domino, when you're running the job, you could create custom metrics to come out exported as part of the actual column table names of this actual table that we're showing you here for a job. Now, in addition to that, if I select the job itself, you'll see here where it shows you all these options that we have available. If you click on details, I mentioned beforehand when you're working with Domino that we can basically repeat, reproduce, and keep auditability purposes of all the jobs you've run. Even the same goes for workspaces. So if we go back real quick to MLOps lifecycle, you'll see here this is the last piece of the second layer of developing your model. When I've run my job, I have the lineage to go back and track that. What I mean by that is, you see if you selected any job, I can see the command I ran. If I provided any input files, any output files that came from that job, any results, like for example, standard out on the terminal output, as well as then, what hardware tier I want to select. And then, if I selected a specific environment, and then if I use any Domino data sets. Because we keep track of all of this, again, going back to that model lineage aspect of it when you're working in the MLOps, if I go ahead and select any given job I've worked with in the past, and I go right back to the options as run, you see where it says here the arrow. When I click on the arrow, it's going to say rerun with either the latest version or rerun with the original version. And so what this is saying is that I can either go back and run this job again now with all the files I've updated for the project, or I can run it with the original assets that belonged to this job when I first ran it. And again, that's just making sure you keep track of auditability purposes, reproducibility, and repeatability inside of Domino as well. And also, if you record metrics, we're going to record that for you and just show it to you as part of a trend above here for a job. In this situation, I don't have much running, so you can't see much of a trend, but if I did have more results coming out, then you would see that specifically. Now, this is me running the job manually. If I go to the bottom here where it says schedule jobs, so underneath jobs in the left blue nav, underneath the publish section where it says schedule jobs, if I select that option, I can run a job instead in an automated format. And in this specific case, I can run it based on a certain time frame if necessary. So if I just click on new scheduled job, I'd provide the job name itself, again, the command, the hardware tier, the environment, the compute cluster if I want to attach one. And then we see where it says schedule here, I can basically go ahead and set up a job to run specifically if I want to based on a certain time frame, or have it run based on a certain custom expression that I would want to create instead. And I can have this where jobs can run sequentially or in parallel, depending on the type of requirements the job has. And then I can have it where an action can come from a job. For example, maybe updating the current existing model API endpoint that exists if I need to, and then notifying me or someone or a set of individuals or a group in that capacity about the outputs of the actual job itself. And this is how we can schedule them. Now, this is just information for you to know, so you understand, more along the lines of how batch jobs can run in Domino. You can also communicate or build these jobs you want to programmatically by using Domino's REST API on the front end. We do have a REST API that you can just communicate programmatically, for example, with CI/CD. If you want jobs to run, you can do it in that manner as well. You don't have to do it directly in the platform. You can do it external. Now, from there, I'm going to show you model APIs, and then we'll quickly go into model monitoring. So I'll take the next 5 minutes to do that, and then we can do Q&A for the last 10 minutes. So in Domino, you see where it says model APIs as well. If I'm in a project, if you click new model, and with respect to your project, just give it the name you want to give it. So I'm going to say API_tests. Project is assigned the wine quality. I'm going to click log HTTP requests and responses. I'm going to click next. When I do that, you'll see now where Domino's going to ask you, do you want to attach a Docker environment? Basically, an environment to select for your endpoint. The answer to that question is yes. Within Domino, API endpoints are basically handled in Domino. It's all internal to Domino. And so you can also attach its own environment. You could extract this outside to use with Domino using our REST API programmatically. So you can basically create a model in Domino, but use it as an endpoint externally to Domino. You have that choice as well. If you click on the file that you want to select, basically the file is going to help you communicate specifically to the artifact, that model artifact that we're going to store as an endpoint to create the endpoint itself. I'm going to just type in predict.py. And then you can call out the function that's going to help you run whatever you need specifically to build this endpoint with respect to that script. So I'm going to write the word predict. And then when I'm done, I'm just going to go ahead and create model. And what happens is this will then go ahead and create for me my endpoint. As in this case, you can see here, the endpoint is wine model John. So I can select this. This is the one that I already had previously existing. We'll show you the endpoint itself. I can go ahead and ping it to run some tests if I need to. So I'm just going to go in here, run some tests. When I do that, I can see the results that come out of this. I can work for any programming language with respect to the endpoint that's created in Domino that can be pinged when you provide basically a payload of data. It'll come back and give you a response, which is basically your predictions, as you see here in this example. I got a scale 1 to 10, like I mentioned before. This wine specifically, based on the features that I have here selected as the payload I've sent, is saying that, this is a 6.59. It's not that great of wine. Good to know. So now that I know the information, if I say, for example, I want to go ahead and build this as a model to monitor itself, you'll see here when I go into monitoring inside of Domino, if I select this option inside of any endpoint that I'm working in, I can attach basically the trained data set that I used for this specific model to go ahead and then monitor that, for example, with respect to data drift. So in this case, you'll see here, I have an example, a quick overview of data drift and model quality. This trained data set came from this model since I built it in Domino. The prediction data is just basically coming from the endpoint being pinged when you're sending the incoming requests. And then for model quality, it's also using the prediction data. And then it's also using ground truth, but that will come from an external data source that you would provide the Domino, so it can keep track of the prediction data and the ground truth to come back and let you know what your metric score results look like specifically. So to configure this in Domino, I just go click on the configure monitoring, and then I tell Domino where the trained data set exists for my specific model and what type of model type it is. When I click save, on the right side, you can see Domino's going to show you model monitoring. If I select this option here, then Domino is going to show me the model that I'm monitoring for that specific endpoint. And it's going to show me a quick overview of the data drift, model quality for the last 3 days. And say, for example, we've had successes or failures. If it's data drift, how many of the features failed with respect to the drift that I'm detecting and I'm monitoring, and the model quality is just the metrics I have set up. And if they failed or they didn't fail, and then within the last 7 days of prediction traffic. But if I go into the model itself, I can actually dig in deeper and see, for example, okay, I can see prediction data and I can see ground truth data. Ground truth is that external data source I talked about before, but I can see the traffic that's incoming for the prediction data and then the traffic for the ground truth that was recorded, basically the results that are actual for the model that I'm trying to predict, specifically one quality. And then we can see that comparison based on a certain time frame that you selected here above for each option. And you can add data, for example, as you see here with this button. I don't have to add prediction data because this model was built in Domino, so it's going to get that data directly from the actual endpoint while it's being pinged, but ground truth will just be provided as an external data source. If I select data drift, for example, here, we'll show you the features that I'm looking at, the distribution between the trained data set and prediction data set for that individual feature, the test type that I want to look at, the comparison range, and then the threshold, and then the trend for this entire range that you see here with respect to the feature that we're reviewing for data drift. And just gives you an idea, just have an understanding of, whether I'm meeting this threshold or not. And then you can also have the enablement for an alert that will be sent to you by email directly, let you know if you have some form of drift or not. The same will apply directly to model quality. And you'll see what model quality is just going to be for metrics specifically. I can see the actual comparison, the threshold itself. I can also send alerts or deactivate them if necessary. And I can see the trend specifically that I'm seeing forming from the value of this actual metric with respect to the threshold that I've set up. And you see here where it says notifications. That just means I can turn on notifications or turn it off specifically. Now, but for the most part, that's really the entire MLOps lifecycle. The one thing I did not show you, which I'll show you real quick now, is just a web application. But this representation of what I showed you is a true end-to-end, beginning till end, actual MLOps lifecycle for building a model. Specifically in this case, it's just wine quality. And so to end everything, what I want to show you is if I'm in a project and I want to see some form of visualization when I'm looking at my project and I'm looking at, what I've built so far, there's an option here that says app on the left blue nav. If I select this option, I can enable in Domino a interactive front end to go ahead and view specifically my model and the results, or even use the API endpoint to ping to show an example of how an application can use this endpoint. So if I click on where it says view app here, it's going to take me to an application. Actually, that's not the one. Give me 1 second. As you see here, I'm looking at an application that I just created specifically where it's going to be using all the features that I previously showed you. I have the option to go ahead and click predict. This is using specifically Dask as the backend. I can use, for example, Shiny as the backend as well, or Flask as well to go ahead and build a web application to communicate. So I'm going to close this to show you more of an interactive environment. So I'm going to click view app again. And you'll see here that I'm going to show you the application. Again, these are the features. I can give them different values. So say 0.98. So the density of this one is 0.98. The volatile acidity is 0.25. The chloride is 0.05. It's a red wine. Yes, it's not a white one. The alcohol level is 10. So I'm going to click predict. And so far, Domino's going to come back and say, hey, this is a 5.26. It's not the best type of wine. And then we're going to give you some insight here. This came from a web application that you built in Domino by providing the scripts necessary to do that. And you can see here interactively that, just bringing into visual the actual results of really looking at wine quality in Domino itself. But for the most part, that is the end of the demo. So we have 8 minutes left. So I want to give you some time back to answer questions. So please ask away. Is everyone able to ask questions? Or are they muted?
Yeah, I had a question.
Go for it.
Is there a way to track how much you're spending?
Yes, great question. So remember how I showed you hardware tiers before? So let's go back to workspaces real quick. When you create a new workspace, you see here how it showed you the hardware tier. You can see there's a little association of a cost. You can associate costs to hardware tiers however you desire. When you do that, and that's attached to either, say, for example, workspace or a job, instead of Domino, there's an option here that says underneath the left blue nav here, for for the Rubik's box, you see where it says control center. If I select this option, I can see the cost that's associated either by user, by organization, by hardware tier, or by project. Was this what you were asking when you specifically asked that question?
Mhm.
Yep. So, and
Right.
then I can also
Yeah.
see it based on time frame as well if necessary too. And I can select the time frame that I want to look at specifically for this cost.
John, I have one question.
Go for it, Vinny.
So, what I'm seeing from a couple of months, I'm seeing there are a lot of products in this AI space, such as this what MLOps is getting created, right? So there are a lot of companies who are working on this platform and coming up with their own version. So I just want, like, I've seen other products also. So I want to know, is there any, like, apart from what you have shown, is there any other capabilities that you guys are planning to incorporate in this platform? For example, if I have to work on a reinforcement learning project, so or like I'm just asking, I mean, do you guys are working on any other capabilities to add in this product, or uh, or we are good on this?
Oh, no, we have plenty of capabilities that we're constantly adding every year as part of our roadmap. I can't discuss them because that would require a private NDA. But no, we have plenty of capabilities that we've added. We've actually added more with the recent release of 5.2. We've announced publicly about added Nexus, where you can work in a hybrid environment. For example, the control plane of Domino can be, for example, on AWS, and then you can work with the data planes of your data sets based on your compliance requirements that exists in GCP or in Azure or an on-prem environment. As an example of that would be, say, for instance, you're in the US, you have data scientists working on building models here in the US, but the data exists in Europe and you can't extract that data from Europe to use it in the US. Well, then you can build workflows workflows within inside of Europe as an example, where that data stays in Europe, it's not being extracted out, and be able to meet those compliance requirements. So there's many
Yeah. So actually, what I want to know is that, for example, Google come up with this Vertex AI, right? And so, I mean, how can I choose among different MLOps platforms? There are a lot of platform out there, and I have to choose uh, the best one. I mean, which can be more user friendly, which can provide. So if you can guide me in that.
So that seems to be more of a, which is the best option for me. I would say it depends on your use cases. Like, what are you trying to do? Where is your data available? How can you access your data currently now? If you're telling me you can only access your data on-prem, well, then you can't use any of the cloud providers for MLOps. That would most likely have to be an on-prem product you would use. So it would depend. I wouldn't say directly, like, I can't say just use Domino when I don't know what your use cases are. I would say, depending on your use cases, the amount of users you have, the amount of users that are working in building your data science models, it would make sense to give you more guidance there. For example, if there's only 3 on your team or 2 data scientists on your team, would Domino be the best choice? I wouldn't say necessarily yes, due to the fact that the size will not be able to meet the requirements you would want to really use Domino for as a scalable platform for enterprise requirements. If you're working with data that only exists in the cloud and you can only use it in GCP, say, for example, then that's maybe something that might be the best choice for you. But again, that depends on the use cases. I can't say ideally there is one. I would say, what are you trying to solve? Based on what you're trying to solve and then those use cases, then I can give you some more insight on what best choice to take.
Completely agree. Yeah, thanks.
Perfect, no problem. Thank you. Great question. If you want, you can send me an email. We can look into it further and I can help guide you there depending on your use cases and whatnot along those lines. Does anybody else have any other questions before we exit? If not, you can just send an email to me as well. My email is john.posada@dominodalab.com, and I can answer your questions based on what you're asking, hopefully as quick as possible as well. And thank you for your time.